Imagine a place on Earth where a single stretch of water helps control the world energy supply. Every day, roughly 20 million barrels of oil pass through this narrow choke point. The route is so tight that shipping lanes used by giant oil tankers are only about 3 kilometers wide in each direction. This place is called the Strait of Hormuz. And right next to this narrow choke point sits a country whose geography looks almost like a natural fortress. This country is Iran. But here's the real question. If a powerful country wanted to invade Iran today, how difficult would it actually be? The answer isn't just politics, it's geography. And once you see the terrain of Iran, you will understand why armies have struggled here for thousands of years. In this video, we will look at the mountains, deserts and narrow choke points that make Iran one of the hardest places in the world to invade. If you look at a map, Iran doesn't seem that unusual, but geography isn't about the shape of a country. It's about what land actually looks like. Most of Iran sits on something called the Iranian Plateau. Think of it like a giant elevated bowl of land sitting roughly 3,000 to 5,000 feet above sea level. Now imagine trying to invade a country that already sits on higher ground. But it gets even harder, because surrounding this plateau are massive mountain walls. To the north lies the Alborz mountain, and to the west and southwest stretch the enormous Zagros mountain. Together, they create something that looks almost like a fortress built by nature itself. But mountain alone is not the whole story, because inside Iran lies another challenge. Right in the middle of Iran are two massive deserts. One of them is Dasht-e Kavir, also known as the Great Salt Desert. The other is Dasht-e Lut, and these are not ordinary deserts. In part of the Lut Desert, ground surface temperature have exceeded 70 degrees Celsius. That is among the hottest surface temperature ever recorded on Earth. Now imagine an army trying to move through this landscape. You don't just need soldiers, you need water, food, fuel, vehicles and supply lines. And deserts destroy supply lines. This means any invading army has only two real choices: either cross the mountain or cross the desert. And here, neither option is easy. Let's talk about the Zagros mountain, because these mountains have shaped war for centuries. The Zagros range stretches for about 1500 kilometers. But what makes this mountain so difficult is not just their height, it's their structure. The mountain runs in long parallel ridges. That means armies cannot simply move freely across them. Instead, they are forced into a narrow valley and mountain passes. And when an army is forced into a narrow path, it becomes predictable. Defenders know exactly where the enemy must pass. This creates a huge advantage. But here's something interesting. Despite all this terrain, one famous commander actually managed to conquer Persia. And he did it more than 2,300 years ago. In 331 BCE, the army of Alexander the Great marched towards the heart of Persian Empire. The Persians blocked his path at a narrow mountain pass called the Persian Gate. It was the perfect defensive position. The pass was so narrow that only a few soldiers could move through at a time. Alexander's army was stuck, or at least it looked that way. Instead of attacking directly, Alexander sent scouts into the mountain. They eventually discovered a hidden path that went around the pass. During the night, part of his army climbed through the mountain. At dawn, they attacked the Persian defenders from behind. The defensive line collapsed. The lesson here is fascinating. Alexander didn't defeat the terrain, he outsmarted it. But most armies in history were not so lucky. Fast forward to 1980s. During the Iran-Iraq War, Iraqi force invaded Iran with modern tanks and mechanized division. On the flat land near the border, the Iraqi armies moved quickly. But as the fighting continued and moved into the Zagros mountain, everything slowed down. Tanks struggled on narrow roads, supply trucks stretched for kilometers, fuel consumption increased, and defenders sitting on higher ground could easily absorb everything. The war lasted for 8 years, and when it ended in 1988, the borders were almost exactly where they had been before the invasion. The terrain had turned the conflict into a long stalemate. Now let's return to where we started, the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest point, the strait is about 33 kilometers wide. Through this narrow passage flows around one-fifth of the world's oil supply. That means any disruption here could immediately affect global energy prices. And Iran's southern coastline runs right along the northern edge of this choke point. This doesn't mean Iran completely controls the strait, but geography gives it significant strategic leverage. A narrow waterway concentrates enormous economic importance into a very small space. Today, we have satellites, drones, and precision missiles. So you might ask, does terrain even matter anymore? The answer is yes. Satellites can show where something is, but they don't change the fact that mountains slow movement, desert drains resources, and narrow passages create a choke point. Even in modern warfare, enemies still depend on roads, fuel, and supply lines, and geography still shapes all of those things. Iran's borders were not designed by generals or politicians. They were shaped by tectonic plates over millions of years. Mountains formed natural barriers, deserts created internal obstacles, and the Strait of Hormuz became one of the most important choke points in the global economy. That's why for thousands of years, invading this region has never been easy. Because in the end, geography doesn't decide history, but it limits the choices people can make, and that's exactly where geography shapes life.